Clara moved through the restaurant like a ghost, a necessary but unseen presence. At 21, she had perfected the art of invisibility. It was a required skill at the Meridian, a place where money was so old it had grown silent and power was a low hum beneath the surface of polite conversation. Her uniform, a severe black dress with a starched white apron, was a costume of subservience, designed to blend into the shadows between tables draped in heavy linen. She carried trays of food that cost more than her monthly rent, refilled glasses with wine that shimmered like liquid rubies, and cleared away the remnants of forgotten feasts. Her movements were economical, her expression a carefully constructed mask of pleasant neutrality. She was a pair of hands, a quiet voice asking about water preferences, a fleeting shape in the periphery. To the patrons of the Meridian, she was part of the decor. And that was how she survived. Her world was one of sensory details, the rich scent of truffle oil, the delicate chime of crystal glasses touching, the soft murmur of a dozen conversations weaving into a single, indecipherable tapestry of wealth. She noticed everything. The slight tremor in a man's hand as he signed a check, the way a woman's smile never quite reached her eyes, the subtle shift in a room's atmosphere when a certain person entered. These observations were her silent currency, a way of understanding a world she would never belong to. Her father had taught her to see the world differently. He wasn't a man of money or status. He was a high school chemistry teacher who smelled of chalk dust and acetic acid. In the summers, she'd help him clean the lab, swabbing beakers and wiping down countertops stained with the ghosts of 1,000 experiments. He taught her the language of elements, the poetry of molecular bonds. It was from him she inherited an unusually sharp sense of smell, an ability to parse the air and identify faint, forgotten chemicals. A strange inheritance for a waitress, a useless skill, she had always thought. Until tonight. The room changed when Sheikh Al-Hamad arrived. It wasn't a loud announcement, but a subtle, powerful shift, like a magnetic field suddenly asserting its presence. The ambient chatter dipped for a fraction of a second before resuming, a collective, subconscious acknowledgement of his entrance. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, a tall figure in a pristine white thobe and a red and white keffiyeh held in place by a simple black agal. He was flanked by two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits who looked severe and watchful. They were Westerners, their faces hard and unreadable. The Sheikh's own face was a study in dignified control, his features sharp, his dark eyes scanning the room with an unnerving stillness. He seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. He was seated at table 12, the best in the house, nestled in a quiet alcove with a view of the city lights. Serving powerful men was always a tightrope walk. They demanded perfection but offered no acknowledgement of the effort it required. She approached the table, her water pitcher held steady, her professional smile firmly in place. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I offer you still or sparkling water?" Her voice was a soft, practiced murmur. The two suited men looked through her. The Sheikh's gaze flickered over her for a moment. So brief and impersonal, she felt more like an object than a person, before he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Still," one of the suited men said, his voice clipped. Clara poured the water into 3 delicate crystal glasses, her movements fluid and precise. She placed menus before them, her hands never trembling, and retreated back into the shadows to wait. She watched them from a distance, the way a naturalist might observe creatures in an alien habitat. The Sheikh was a man accustomed to silence, comfortable in it. He rarely spoke, listening as his companions talked in low, earnest tones about contracts and logistics. He was a mountain of calm in a sea of ambition. The meal progressed with the seamless, choreographed precision the Meridian was famous for. Appetizers arrived and were cleared. Main courses were served. Throughout it all, Clara remained vigilant, her senses on high alert. There was something about the two men, with the Sheikh, that felt dissonant. Their deference was a performance, their smiles thin veneers over something tense and watchful. Their hands were never still, one drumming his fingers on the tablecloth, the other constantly adjusting his tie. It was the man adjusting his tie who excused himself from the table just before dessert was to be served. He walked towards the restrooms, but his path was circuitous, his eyes scanning the room. A few minutes later, he returned. He was carrying the Sheikh's water glass, which a busboy had just refilled. This was a breach of etiquette. Staff handled the service, never guests. He placed the glass down on the white linen with a deliberate, almost reverent slowness. He leaned in close to the Sheikh, murmuring something that was lost in the restaurant's hum. As he did, Clara was passing by on her way to an adjacent table, her arms laden with a heavy tray of used dishes. It was then that she caught it. A smell. It was faint, almost entirely swallowed by the scent of the lilies on the table and the lingering aroma of seared scallops. But it was there. A sharp, acrid note, unnervingly chemical. It was the scent of bitter almonds. Her blood went cold. The tray in her hands suddenly felt immensely heavy. The smell was a ghost from a distant memory, from a dusty high school laboratory on a hot summer afternoon. Her father, holding up a small, brown bottle, his face serious. Cyanide compounds, he had told her, his voice low. They smell like bitter almonds to some people. You smell it, you don't ask questions. You just get out. Never a second chance with that one kiddo. The memory was so vivid, so absolute, that for a moment she was no longer in the restaurant. She was a child again, standing in the shadow of her father's wisdom, learning about the invisible dangers of the world. Dread, cold and swift, seized her. She stood frozen for a second, the sounds of the restaurant fading into a dull roar in her ears. It couldn't be. Her mind scrambled for rational explanations. It was a new cleaning product. It was a bizarre ingredient in someone's perfume. It was her imagination, a phantom scent dredged up from a long-buried memory. But her instincts, honed by years of quiet observation and that one strange lesson from her father, screamed that she was wrong. It was real. She looked at the table. The Sheikh was concluding his conversation, his hand moving with casual grace towards the very glass the man had just placed before him. The water inside it looked pure, clear, innocent. But Clara saw it now as a vessel of death. The world seemed to slow down, each second stretching into an agonizing eternity. What could she do? Shout a warning? The entire restaurant would erupt into chaos. She would be tackled by security, fired, possibly arrested for inciting a panic. Who would believe her? A waitress, a nobody, making a wild accusation against two powerful men dining with a foreign dignitary. They would say she was hysterical, delusional, seeking attention. She could already hear the dismissive questions, feel the scornful looks. Her entire life, her job, her future, could be destroyed in a single, reckless moment. And what if she was wrong? The humiliation would be unbearable. She would become a cautionary tale whispered among the staff for years. It was safer to do nothing, to turn away, to retreat into her invisibility, and let the moment pass. It was not her business. It was not her world. But then her eyes met the Sheikh's glass again. He was about to lift it. The image of her father's face, so serious and so loving, flashed in her mind. Never a second chance. The risk to herself was immense, but the potential cost of her silence was absolute.
It was a man's life.
In that silent, terrifying moment, Clara realized that her invisibility was no longer a shield. It was a choice, and she could not choose to be blind. Her decision was not a thought, but a physical impulse, a surge of adrenaline that bypassed all fear and logic. Her body moved before her mind could raise another objection. Her hand dove into her apron pocket, her fingers fumbling for the small, dog-eared notepad she used for taking orders. The pen felt slick and foreign in her trembling grip. Her mind was a storm of panicked thoughts, a frantic search for the right words. There was no time for a long explanation, no room for ambiguity. It had to be a lightning strike. Simple.
Direct.
Final. Her pen scratched across the paper, the letters clumsy and rushed. 2 words, don't drink it. It wasn't enough. He needed to understand the urgency, the finality of the threat. She added 2 more, underlining them twice with a frantic, jagged line. "Leave now." She stared at the 4 words. They looked like a mad scrawl, the work of a lunatic. Who would possibly heed such a cryptic, insane warning? But it was the truth, distilled into its most potent form. It was all she had. She tore the small sheet from the pad and folded it quickly, creasing it into a tight, tiny square, a secret to be passed in the space of a heartbeat. Her own heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, so loud, she was sure the entire room could hear it. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to force a mask of calm onto her face. The restaurant, with its soft lighting and hushed elegance, suddenly felt like a stage, and she was about to step into the spotlight for the very first time, with no script and no idea how the scene would end. She knew only one thing with chilling certainty. Once she took that first step, there would be no turning back. She was no longer a ghost. She was a participant. She picked up a small, polished silver tray from the service station. On it, she placed a tiny porcelain dish holding 2 after-dinner mints wrapped in gold foil. It was her prop, her excuse for existing, the flimsy cover for an act of impossible audacity. She walked towards table 12. Each step was a conscious effort, a battle against the screaming instinct to turn and run. The plush carpet seemed to swallow the sound of her feet, making her approach eerily silent. She could feel the ambient energy of the room, but her focus was narrowed to a single point: the man, the table, the glass. The world had shrunk to this one critical moment. As she reached the table, she saw the Sheikh's hand was now resting just an inch from the base of the poison glass. Time was gone. "Complimentary mints, sir," she murmured, her voice a strained whisper she prayed sounded normal. She leaned forward, placing the dish on the table. In that same motion, a deliberate, calculated breach of every rule she had ever been taught, she let her hand brush against the sleeve of his thobe. The contact was electric. He turned his head, his dark, formidable eyes finally focusing on her, not as a functionary, but as an individual. For the first time, she saw a flicker of emotion in them, surprise, bordering on annoyance at her clumsiness. That was her opening. In that split second of distraction, her other hand, the one holding the tiny, folded note, moved like a striking snake. She pressed the square of paper into the palm of his hand, which was resting open on the table. Her fingers were cold and stiff, but she managed to curl his own fingers over the note, enclosing it, forcing him to accept it. For one terrifying, eternal moment, their eyes locked. She tried to pour every ounce of her conviction, her fear, her desperate sincerity into that single look. It was a silent, primal scream. Then she pulled her hand back as if burned, straightened up, and turned away. She walked back towards the shadows of the service station, her spine rigid, her entire being braced for the inevitable explosion. She reached the relative safety of the service station and leaned against the wall, her legs threatening to buckle. She did not dare to look back immediately. She busied herself with rearranging clean glasses, her hands shaking so badly that the crystal chimed softly. The sound was deafening in her own ears. The expected shout never came. No alarm was raised. No heavy hand fell on her shoulder to drag her towards the manager's office. The low hum of the restaurant continued unbroken. It was as if nothing had happened. The suspense was a physical pressure, crushing the air from her lungs. She finally risked a glance. The scene at table 12 was unchanged. The 2 suited men were talking. The Sheikh was sitting perfectly still, a portrait of regal composure. His right hand, the one she had touched, was still resting on the tablecloth. She could see the edge of the small, white square peeking from between his fingers. He hadn't looked at it. A wave of despair washed over Clara. He had dismissed it, thought it was a flirtatious note from a foolish girl, or perhaps just a piece of trash she had accidentally passed him. It had all been for nothing. Her monumental risk had been a pointless, stupid gesture. She watched, her hope draining away, as he continued to listen to his companions. Then, so slowly she almost missed it, his gaze shifted downward. He didn't move his head, only his eyes. He looked at the note nestled in his palm. His expression did not change. Not a flicker of surprise, not a hint of alarm. He simply looked. Then, with the same deliberate slowness, his fingers uncurled. He picked up the note, keeping it below the level of the table, shielded from the view of the other two men. He read the 4 words she had written. A profound stillness settled over him, an absence of motion so absolute it was more terrifying than any sudden action. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. His eyes lifted from the paper. They did not look at his companions. They did not look at the glass of water. They scanned the room, sweeping past the other diners, past the other staff, until they found her, hiding in the shadows. His eyes locked onto hers across the crowded room. There was no anger in them, no confusion. There was only a quiet, piercing intensity, a look that seemed to strip away her uniform, her fear, her very invisibility, and see the terrified young woman beneath. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement of a shared, terrifying secret. The connection held for a beat, 2 beats, 3. The world seemed to hang suspended in that gaze. Then he broke it. He pushed his chair back from the table. The sound of the wood scraping against the polished floor was abrupt and loud in the hushed atmosphere. Several heads turned. The 2 men with him stopped talking, their faces a mask of surprise. The Sheikh rose to his full height, a commanding presence. He placed his linen napkin neatly beside his plate, a gesture of finality. "We are leaving," he said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed an authority that was absolute, cutting through any potential argument. The 2 men exchanged a look of bewilderment, a flash of something else. Was it panic? In their eyes. One of them started to speak, but the Sheikh was already turning away from the table. He began walking towards the main entrance, his pace unhurried but resolute. Clara's station was directly in his path. She flattened herself against the wall, trying to disappear again, her role in the drama now over. But as he drew level with her, he didn't pass by. He stopped. He turned to face her. Without a word, he reached out, and his large, warm hand closed around her wrist. The grip wasn't harsh, but it was firm, unbreakable. It was a claim. She looked up at him, her heart hammering. "Come," he said. It was not a request. It was a quiet command that permitted no refusal. He began walking again, pulling her along with him. The restaurant manager, seeing a waitress being led out by a dignitary, started to move forward, his face a mixture of confusion and alarm. But before he could take 2 steps, 2 other men, previously unnoticed among the patrons, materialized and blocked his path. They were the Sheikh's security, silent, immovable. Sheikh Al-Hamad led Clara out of the gilded dining room, through the ornate lobby, and out into the shocking chill of the night air. The sudden cold was a slap to the face, chasing away the dreamlike quality of the last few minutes. The city sounds, a distant siren, the rumble of traffic, rushed in to fill the silence. A sleek, black sedan was waiting at the curb, its engine purring softly. The Sheikh's security detail formed a discreet but impenetrable perimeter around them, separating them from the world. He finally released her wrist. The skin where he had held her tingled. He turned to face her fully, his expression no longer guarded. The immense power was still there, but the cold distance had been replaced by something else, something deeply human and searching. He stood there for a long moment, simply looking at her as if trying to solve a complex and beautiful puzzle. His dark eyes held a weight she could not begin to comprehend, the weight of a life that had just been pulled back from the brink. The 2 men from the table had followed them out, their faces now openly showing agitation and confusion, but the security team kept them at a distance. Here, on the quiet sidewalk, it was just the 2 of them. "Why?" he asked finally. The single word was not an accusation. It was a genuine question, soft and laced with a quiet awe. His voice was richer, warmer than she had imagined. Clara swallowed, her throat dry. She struggled to find her own voice, which felt small and thin in the vastness of the night. "The smell," she whispered, the words tumbling out. "The water. It smelled wrong," she told him about her father, the chemistry teacher. about the summers in the lab, the strange lessons on poisons, the memory of bitter almonds. It sounded absurd, a flimsy, unbelievable story. A fairy tale of sense and memory. She expected him to dismiss it, to demand proof. But he just listened, his gaze unwavering, his attention absolute. He nodded slowly when she finished, a deep, thoughtful motion. He didn't need lab tests or witnesses. He saw the undeniable truth in her trembling voice and her wide, honest eyes. He understood the profound, irrational courage of her act. He saw the girl who had risked everything on the ghost of a cent. He did not offer her money. He did not make a grand, sweeping gesture of reward, the kind people in his position were expected to make. The moment was too real, too raw for such a transaction. Instead, he offered her something far more valuable. He offered her recognition. He reached out and took her hand, the same one that had passed in the note, the one that had just stopped shaking, and held it gently between both of his. His hands were warm and strong. He looked down at her small hand, then back up at her face. "You have a brave heart," he said, his voice imbued with a quiet reverence. "And good eyes. You see what others do not." The simple words landed with more weight than any fortune could. It was an acknowledgement of her true self, the observant, quiet girl who lived beneath the waitress's uniform. He had seen her. For the first time all night, Clara felt a sense of profound relief wash over her, a release of tension so complete it almost brought her to her knees. He then gave a slight nod to one of his security men. The man spoke softly into his wrist, and within a minute, another car, equally sleek and black, pulled up to the curb. "My driver will ensure you arrive home safely," the Sheikh said. It was a statement of care, not a dismissal. He was placing her under his protection. He released her hand, and one of his men opened the car door for her. As she slid onto the soft leather seat, she looked back. Sheikh Al-Hamad was still standing on the sidewalk, a solitary, powerful figure watching her. The city lights cast a halo around him. The two men who had been with him were now being spoken to by his security team, their faces pale with dawning horror. Clara's car pulled away from the curb, and as it turned the corner, she saw him one last time. He was no longer a distant, imposing Sheikh. He was a man who had been saved by the attention of a ghost. The world she was returning to was the same one she had left, a small apartment, bills to pay, a life of quiet anonymity. But she was not the same. She had been invisible, and her invisibility had given her the power to see. Tonight, by choosing to act, she had learned that the smallest light can push back the deepest shadow, and that the quietest voice, speaking a dangerous truth, can be the loudest sound in the room.